I'm calling the Solid Waste Committee meeting to order for Thursday, February 20th. And it's noon. I am Linda Nishioka, chair for this committee. Would the rest of you like to introduce yourselves?
I am Mickey Varney, city councilor.
Dan Gwen, also city councilor.
And Councilor Brown will not be able to join us today. So I will pass this off now to staff and then guests to introduce themselves. Do you want to start at this side of the table and we'll work from there?
Thank you. Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Gretchen Bennett, and I work for the city of Salem. And one of my roles is to be a liaison on homelessness issues.
Josh Hagus, I'm the chief financial officer.
Ryan Zeke, I'm the franchise administrator.
Weinbach, budget manager. And Shannon Thomas, finance administrator.
It's a negotiated monitor operations. Okay.
Leon Douglas, action plan manager, also.
And then we'll go ahead with guests.
John Livingston, I live in South Salem. I moved to Salem 3 years ago. I have a lot of expertise in solid waste, retired.
Kevin Hines with Mid Valley Garbage and Recycle.
Shane Kinsey, also with Mid Valley Haulers. I'm the president of that, but then also run a suburban garbage hauler, so.
Okay. Carson Kinsey, Mid Valley, as well as Pacific Sanitation.
Brian May, Grant County Environmental Services Division. Jake Snell, City of Salem.
All right, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. And so what I now need is a motion from one of my counselors for the minutes from November 21st.
So moved.
Second.
All right, thank you. We don't have any, oh, I guess we could do that. Yeah, I'm gonna take a vote. Even though we seconded, we're all probably all on board with it. All in favor too. Okay.
Aye.
All right, that is approved. Thank you, Brian. So we don't have, can you tell, I need to get this meeting done. And so we don't have anybody signed up for public comment. And so we are now already on 4, which is action items. And I now get to let Brian take over. Thank you.
Counselor, we're gonna just dive kind of right into this to some pretty meaty stuff. I'm gonna get full presentation here. Bear with me for just one moment. So as a reminder, November was our last meeting, been a couple. Missed December with the holidays and then January with just waiting for the appointments for boards and commissions and all that to come out. So this is the first meeting of the year. But one of the last topics that we discussed during that November meeting was a possibility or option of how do we continue funding, or there's some alternate funding for shelter response, remediation, also SOS team, if you will. And so invited Gretchen Bennett and Jake Snell to kind of talk a little bit about that program, so we have some context of what the funding is for before we move into some options around that. So I'm going to move to this next slide and hand it over to Gretchen.
You bet. And I'm going to offer you some brief overview and invite Jake to just jump in as you wish. And of course, and I think you probably all know this is on the minds of a lot of people. This morning, I spent almost an hour with somebody really upset about the volume of waste that they're concerned is getting into the waterway and tracking from and through the waters up into their personal property. And they really just had it up to here. And I think that's the general tenor of a lot of calls that I get. So I know that the issue and the volume of waste in our public spaces is significant. So I'm so grateful at council's decision to form a team just a bit over 2 years ago. And that debris mitigation team is a part of our Salem Outreach and Livability Services, nicknamed SOS, which is just an attempt to address issues related to unsheltered homelessness. And so it's really, the work involves coordination within a broader system to make sure we're not duplicating other efforts, that we're making sure that people who are experiencing homelessness are aware of and could avail themselves with available resources, whether that's housing, shelter, treatment. So we want to make sure that outreach folks are aware of like where there can't be camping and where trash needs to be removed. So those connections are important. The work begins, we receive complaints and calls, all of us do, and the work includes clarifying who owns the property, you know, whose responsibility is it, and making sure to coordinate with people who might be responsible for that work. Often it's the city's property on the blue side, and then we're trying to figure out and coordinate, again, not to duplicate any other systems, what's the appropriate response. Another part of the work is clarifying exactly what's going to need to be involved. Like if there's an area, like the call I took this morning relates to the Claggett Creek Natural Area in the north part of town, and it's a wetland. And Jake and the supervisor, Rick, need to analyze, try to understand the scope of the issue, the type of garbage that's there, the type of equipment that might be necessary to address it, if or whether there's any special things they're going to need to borrow to get the work done, if there's any sort of street closure or access into that they'll need to address to get access to the site. Sometimes things are really steep, slopey, so there's things to think through. So you kind of have an assessment component. We're partnering with police around required notifications to people experiencing homelessness to make sure that that stuff all happens. But then the heart of the work begins with the debris mitigation side of it, which is removing the trash. And Jake's just run some really interesting numbers from last year, generally averaging 23, 24 tons a month overall with some variance, would you say?
Yeah, that number may have changed recently.
Yeah.
That was kind of a tool since we started the program,
Yeah.
an average since we started the program. So most recently I was asked to come up with numbers for specifically 2024. If you're interested, I can share this quickly. So altogether, the team consists of 4 city employees in the field. So that was the leader that Rich mentioned, and then 3 other field maintenance operators, essentially myself and the program. So we collected just under 800,000 pounds in 2024. So 400 tons. It's quite a bit for 4 people. It's 1 truck. Maybe some equipment that we can borrow here and there.
Yeah.
So, and then looking at that even closer, about 36% of that comes out of riparian areas, so along the stream corridors, the river, Mill Creek, Pringle Creek, Shelton Dish. There's a lot of camps in this riparian areas. So that's our biggest chunk, is really out of those areas. Followed by wetlands. It's the second biggest chunk. About 27% comes from wetlands. Then 25% comes out of the right of way. It's just street right of way, sidewalks, some places where the road is widened out, maybe there's a big shoulder. I mean, this like Sunnyview and Hotham, if you remember that, some of that's ODOT, some of that's ours. So a lot of right of way stuff. And then 12% from parks, which seems low considering that it's been in practical parks, but we separate that out because there's a water quality concern, right, with riparian areas and wetlands. So those riparian areas and wetlands mostly reside in parks. So that's why it seems kind of misleading that parks would be so low. It's actually kind of set out of that.
That helps. Thank you for adding that context.
Yeah. And then in terms of time spent, we kind of track through our payroll system, we track our time. Not as carefully as we track where the garbage comes from, but so about 58% of our time spent in parks and natural areas. So that's going to include the wetlands, the riparian areas. About 39% time spent in the right of ways. So that seems lower or kind of high compared to the amount of cars that comes out of the right of ways. It's not as high as that percent of the time. But because it's all over town, we're going here and here and everywhere to get that stuff out of the right of ways and off the sidewalks and stuff. So whereas when we're collecting it from wetlands and parks, it's concentrated, it's a lot of stuff in one spot, so. That's kind of. I thought that was. And then there's no Slim City property, so pump stations, some undeveloped, it's in there. Spot, things up the other 3%.
Thank you. These men work so hard. It's been the same team for over 2 years now, and they're just working really hard, this group of gentlemen. Yeah.
So I was, and others may have questions, but I just was hoping that maybe you could also make it, help us understand how there's crossover territories. So, crossover territories in the sense it might be city property, or it might be at the edge of city property and now it's on the railroad. And, or other times where it might be, state, if it's underneath the state highway. So you might help us understand how we have to then, whether it be Rick or you, how we have to coordinate that.
Yeah, it's really important. Do you want to speak to that or?
So there's a lot of areas like that, a lot around town. So we have places like just right here downtown, that the railroad going through, ODOT bridges going over, we have city streets going under. So it's like a trifecta, a lot of, and then the more we do this, the more the people experiencing homelessness kind of learn, okay, well, this is city, this is ODOT, this is railroad. So we'll just go over here. So, yeah, it takes a lot of coordination between, and we just really started getting a good relationship on the railroad.
Good.
Both railroads, because there's two that live in town. And,
I don't think I knew that. Thank you.
yeah, there's two separate ones. So just thanks to actually the efforts of the police department, started doing, leadership with them, actually partnering with them more. To this point, we really haven't had much of a partnership that's changing. So it was really hard to affect change into railroad corridors. So.
That's really good to hear, because I know that I've had residents in my ward continuously call me because it's, you have to clean it up, the city has to clean it up because there's a sign nearby, but yet where the debris is on the railroad property, and so it gets confusing for them.
That's
Well, there's a city sign there, and yet we couldn't clean it up because it was railroad, so it's a challenge even for me to understand all of the breakdown. And then try to explain it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Have a monthly meeting with the operations people.
That's good to know.
First of every month, first Monday of every month.
Yeah, something like that.
And then actually the police sergeant Gilman, police department is doing that meeting too, so. We're kind of continuing to build and coordinate.
That's wonderful, okay. Councilors Varney or Gwen, do you have any questions right now?
Not yet. Not yet. Eventually, I'd like to hear what the cost is
Okay.
currently.
That's
Okay.
coming.
That's coming, okay.
That's coming.
Okay.
All
Thank you.
right, Bridget, if you'd like
Absolutely.
to continue.
I think that's essentially it. This slide helps just break down the steps that we wanted to explain. I think the last step is that we just get that waste hauled off. And I wanted to thank Brian and Marion County, because Marion County has been receiving this waste at no charge to the city. And I understand that's, things are changing with Covanta to Marion, but just huge gratitude for that gift, because I know that saved the city money. It's been an amazing thing to be able to tip at no charge. So thank you for that. But no, I hope that provides you with an overview of the work we do. We could keep 3 teams busy. We could start working in areas, even if it's railroad, because it's in the city of Salem and the community wants us to. We could run weekends. We unfortunately spend too much time triaging and explaining to people that we can't get there when they need us to get there, because there's so much work in just one team. But I remember the days before the team and couldn't be more grateful for the team. So it's all relative, but there's certainly more work to be done, out there for sure. But I hope that provides an overview, and Jake and I are here the whole time to support any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, that's
Yeah,
great. I
yeah.
really appreciate you both coming. it's important for us to understand this, and also I think we're gonna be hearing how there'll be some changes coming, and then what we might, how we might be able to help with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Yeah.
So next I want to talk just briefly about. Already asked about funding. How much does this cost right now? So the current budget for FY 25, the fiscal year we're in right now is $822,050. That supports 5 FTEs, so that's Jake for people in the team in the field. The current proposed budget, as we're just right now, just at the very beginning of the FY 26 budget, to maintain that same staffing level into FY 26 is $922,000 and some change there. So that's not adding any more teams. That's simply maintaining the same staffing level that we're currently doing. That is currently being, so this work is currently being funded through the state sheltering grant, which was a limited amount of dollars. So going funding. And so currently the remaining dollars available would fully fund this program through the end of FY 26. If, however, alternate funding is found, right here, that those remaining grant dollars could be redirected towards other eligible programs. And so that brings us to, this slide should look familiar. This was the last slide we had at the November meeting of last year, which was, hey, here are some possible options. And we kind of just had that beginning discussion of, hey, what would it look like if we were to increase the solid waste franchise fee? What does 1% garner? So that's about $450,000 for every 1%. Another option was looking at doing a pass-through fee that would be detailed on the hauler's bill. And every $1 per account would give us about $536,000. I also talked about the possibilities of different timing of when that could be implemented. After that meeting, let me get my slides, so notes up to speed here. By the way, you probably are noticing some pictures along the side of these slides. Those are pictures of some of the work that's been done. This one I found quite interesting. Was actually removing a tree house that was in the tree there. So I had to bring the high lift in there and very well hidden tree house. I say. So
Yeah.
You can't see it in there,
Discovered
but
the right way. Opportunity to really build it out.
So following last meeting, staff was asked by the city managers to say, what would it take from an increase on the franchise fee to garner $1 million in order to continue supporting this program. And so, and to develop a plan around that with an effective date of July 1st of 2025. So it means that $1 million would be earned to additional revenue to support this program in the upcoming fiscal year. If that is done, then like mentioned in the previous slide, those additional funds could be redirected towards other eligible programs.
Might you explain the other eligible programs for that review question, just so that if the money.
Yeah.
Kelly, do you want to, or would you like me to?
Yeah, so this grant is fairly flexible in its use, but it's for unsheltered programs. So ways we've used the funding previously was to support micro shelter sites and the Safe Park program, the Warming Network contribution, and towing for dilapidated RVs and recycling of those RVs. So those are just some of the ways that this grant has been used before.
So if I'm understanding correctly, that if that we're looking at potentially trying to find about
Roughly.
roughly $1 million to support the current SOS team, not expanding, just current, then some of the funds that might have been directed to that this SOS team can now be used for safe farming shelters. And continue to use it until there's no longer available.
Exactly, yes.
We don't currently have those programs proposed for fiscal year 2026 because they don't have a funding source. So one challenge we see is especially the building RVs. They're very expensive to demolish and move out. So if we don't have a funding source to dispose of those, we'll see a backlog or a buildup. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
They are hard to figure out what to do with. Yeah, and that's coordination between us and police and code enforcement. It takes all of us to figure out, figure out what we're gonna do with this thing. Sometimes they get burned. Like, I've slided, but it's not uncommon. They get abandoned and then something gets sprayed, you have to start a fire. So then really nobody wants to, so then what do we do?
We've been spending about $150,000 to $200,000 a year of these grant funds on this, that specific program.
Of that specific program, will be argued.
Yes.
That's good information. Thank you. Thank you for people talking to me.
Please, any questions overall, feel free to. So with that $1 million, that would allow us to continue the SOS team, the remediation portion of that at its current staffing level. Not necessarily expanding anything, but continuing at that same level. Through conversations with city manager, also reaching out to the haulers to say, hey, out of these options, what works best in terms of operationally getting things on the bills, you know, your experience or other communities' experience of doing the same type of thing. And the feedback I heard from the haulers is very clearly they would prefer to do this through a franchise fee increase rather than a pass-through fee that is detailed on the bill. So that's the proposal that we have before you today. So if so in order to, what's that magic number? How do we get the $1 million? What that essentially means is a 2.3% increase on the franchise fee, moving it from, or increasing it from 7% to 9.3%. So if we were to do that, starting in July 1, which is what I've been asked to bring forward, we can also talk about the timing around that. My initial concerns of doing that in July would be, hey, we're implementing this additional cost on the haulers kind of mid-cycle. Normally we have a rate increase, or we consider rate increases for the first of the year. So January, the next cycle for that would be for January 1st of 2026, and this would be mid-cycle. So my first concern is, right, so what is that going to do to our COSA, or cost of service analysis? What impact does that have on haulers? As you can see on the slide there, without any changes, currently the haulers are projected to end this current year, 2025, with about a 9.7% margin, which is very close to the 10% target that we have established. With this proposed franchise increase, that would drop it down to 8.6. Now, the good news is that still is within our target range of 8 to 12%. They could still ask for that difference, and that would be approximately a 3%. If we were to try to make up that difference, it would be a 3% increase on all rates across the board. However, the haulers have offered to forego that rate increase request until January 1st of 2026. So they're essentially giving that, allowing their margin to be decreased the second half of this year if we were to franchise fee increase starting July 1st of this year.
Why would they do that? Because they're not serious.
So I'll let them speak for themselves here a little bit, but part of it, one, there'll be, I think there's more impact to the community. So we just had a rate increase January first.
Oh, I'm aware.
Yep, and then we had the rate increase for medical waste that's happening right now. If we did this, then we'd have a rate increase July 1, we have another one in January. It's a lot. There's also the notification process. That's, there is a cost to notifying, so there's savings that we can have there. If we went through the process of saying, all right, well, this is the ask, and we brought that to council. I think it's being within the 8 to 12%. Council may come back and say, well, no, we're already within that 8 to 12, we're not gonna, we're add that effort and spend the political capital going through the process. So from my perspective, I think that's some of the whys. Do you guys want to speak?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it on. So we as haulers, obviously, yeah, this is gonna affect our bottom line, right? So why would we do it? That's a good question. We see this group with the counselors, Ryan Zeke included, we have a good partnership, we work well together. So we want to be that part of the community. So that's number one. Ryan mentioned all those, the mailing, the notifying, we just asked for a rate increase. That's all part of it, I guess, too. But like for myself, I live in this community, I do care about it. I see the unsheltered problem all over our town. I want to help, we want to do our part. So there's a part of that too. And I can't help but mention, because I've been out on route, especially commercial routes, and you see all of the feces on the ground, the needles, that we do have a problem in this city. And so I think us doing business in this city, it's our duty to kind of partner up with you folks and try to help solve a problem. Yeah, we can't do that forever, right? But for a 6-month period to kind of help get this program funded and going, and it seems like the better long-term way to go about things. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that or.
I think you guys, you said it well, and like I said, you live and you work in this community and you're a part of it, so you want to help, try and solve some of these problems. And it still does fit in, like Ryan said, within the 8 to 12% range. So for a 6-month period, the haulers came together and thought that it was the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate being here and letting us know and are grateful that you're even, bringing this forward.
Well, if I could have one more thing,
You bet.
this is a good opportunity. I don't know how it would work, but we would love to, whether it's through the association or through individual haulers. There's some way we could be a part of some of these cleanups or something. I think it could be a good opportunity for us to partner too. Like I know you talked about partnering with police and in that. So if we can find a way to partner, I think that could be a good thing too.
We've not talked.
Yeah, that's generous. Thank you. They'll be reaching out.
So that kind of talked a little bit about the impact to haulers. One thing to keep in mind is there are some other, along with. I'm not sure if it's on the next screen. Yeah, it is on the next screen. I'll talk about it under this. So while if we move forward with this and we take it to council and change code, starting July 1, what's the impact of how does this impact customers? So in the short term, there would be no impact. The haulers are taking that additional cost on. So the current approved rates are 2025, they continue to stay in place for the rest of this year. Starting January 1st of 2026, there will be I'm confident a proposal or request coming to council this fall for increases for January 2026 and likely 2027 as well. At a minimum, that will include a 3% increase to cover the cost of this franchise fee increase. There are other things, if there's changes in fuel, labor, disposal is probably the biggest open thing right now. With the closing of Covanta, we've lost that resource to be able to take waste to at a
What happened to the tipping fees that we weren't paying? I mean, obviously, we're gonna have to start including that in the costs.
So of the unsheltered waste, so yes, that accounts, so correct me if I'm wrong, but 400 tons that Jake mentioned, times that current 87.25, or excuse me, 107, it's about $40,000 to $45,000. So that is included in the budget, that 922,000.
Okay.
Now, if there are some ways that we can partner, reduce that down, you know, that every dollar saved is helpful.
Thank you.
But so in terms of context, it's a relatively small percentage of the overall budget for this program. Was that a fair statement? It's still impactful, but it's compared to the labor and machinery, so that it's relatively low.
Well, the reason it's impactful is going from 0 to something.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, what'd you say, 40,000?
Yeah, 40,000 to 45,000.
Okay. It's still.
Yep.
That's
It's not small.
We're looking in the couch cushions.
Yep. So next slide here is just a little bit more detail for carts, commercial yard, and also the drop box there, the containers and drop box. Just the impact of a 3% increase on each of those rates. So again, we have the 35 gallon is kind of that standard. It's what most of your residential customers subscribe to. So in Marion County, that 3% increase would increase rates by about $1.14. For commercial, that 2-yard container would be a little over $4. The 20-yard drop box, again, which is the construction box or that type of thing, more it's not a monthly service, but as needed, that would be $14 to $15 each box. Similar numbers down there for Polk County, about $1 for residential. Again, almost $4 there for the commercial. And a little different pricing model for the Polk County side of things, but $7 to $8 there for the drop box. So that is simply the impact of that 3% increase. Doesn't take into consideration again disposal changes, fuel, labor, other inflationary impacts that we're going to see. So the next steps, whatever we do, whatever society, excuse me. First and second reading would be a code change, so we can use the existing authority we have. There's actually a very small minor change within chapter 47 to change it from 7 to a 9.3. We have first and second reading, looking at doing that last meeting in March, 1st of April. If we were to have needed to go through the rate request and that process, we'd have the rate resolution, public hearing, and customer notification around that. But we won't need to do that with the haulers not moving forward with the request to offset 3%.
So there would not be a.
There will be a public hearing for the first reading, public hearing for the code change, but no public hearing for a rate change.
Yes,
for customer rates until January.
It kind of cuts the process in half a little bit, so it's just half of what we would have to do otherwise. It's still a public hearing, it's still two first reading and second reading.
and then we will have a rate increase. That will be coming up January, then we go through that.
That would likely
Yeah.
be in October. Okay.
So that would be just for
For-
for January first rates.
Okay.
That would have been on the site.
So because the haulers are allowing us to, they're going to do this without increasing fees and take that hit for the next 6 months. Then this process is, the first and second reading. When we get to the point where we will be talking about the rate increase for January for next year, then all the information for rate increases.
Is there a reason we can't just do it in January? I mean,
We can. So
And-
the direction I was given was to, what does it look like to implement starting July first? And that's part of the conversation I would have today. When I'm done here and have discussions, does July first make sense? Or do we want to wait entirely until get closer for January? So it'll be a conversation this fall. Preparation for January. I guess.
I agree, so why we need to put another thing on our plates this spring.
So the only consideration is if you're able to fund the SOS team with this alternate funding, it frees up those other dollars to continue at some level, perhaps the warming, towing mitigation. If you started in January instead of July, you lose out on, $500,000 of that funding.
But it's being absorbed anyway, I'm not following
I know,
this.
well, and I'm just thinking about the impact on our community. We've already got people that we're all concerned about the budget, and so to do this now just feels a little disingenuous to me.
But it wouldn't change.
I'm just saying how it feels to me.
So for customers, they wouldn't see a change either way until January. This would be an impact to the haulers for July and January. So there's no actual rate change for
Oh, okay,
customers.
see, I misunderstood. I thought our bills were changing
No,
in July.
no,
That's what we're trying to.
But we're just taking money away.
Yes.
that's exactly. They're being generous and not charging for it.
And now
And so
so now I'm back to that same question, why?
And if I may, that's where we started is, hey, if we want to do this in July, we have to have this rate change. And that's where we had a discussion with the haulers. It's like, okay, well, they're willing to forego it for 6 months.
So Ryan has been working on this for the haulers for those couple months that we have improvements and has gotten it to this point. And so again, there wouldn't be any additional charge to the.
Not now, but it's gonna be pretty substantial.
So
And
when January comes, but we will also be looking at CASA and.
right, that's what I'm saying. It's 3% plus, so it's gonna be 5 to 7% probably, or
And
maybe.
at that point, if we say we don't want this program funded anymore, then we'll have to figure out where the money would come from another pool of money. That's basically as I see it.
Could you explain again why we have to do the color amendment though? Beforehand? Oh,
Yep.
is this here?
So
Okay, I keep asking these questions.
you're just one step ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
You must be looking, so this is,
No.
the highlighted, the yellow highlighted is the actual code to make this happen. So in Sailor Revised Code 47, it states that the franchise fee will be 7%. So that's why the haulers pay 7% of this revenue as a franchise fee. So that requires a code to change, to the code to change that. And in order to target that $1 million of funding, an additional 2.3, so changing from 7 to 9.3 would garner that additional $1 million.
Okay.
And so that is the code change that will be
Okay, okay, that makes more sense. I didn't realize it was a code change on contract. Okay.
And so speaking of the contract, our franchise agreements with the haulers refers directly to this section, and so there would be no change in the contract, because
Okay.
it refers to, just as, hey, whatever's in code is what they're gonna pay, based on. So that's the only change that we did. And so just again, as a discussion point, this is the recommendation that I would ask, that I'm asking as a motion today, but for discussion, want to change any of this, changing either the implementation date. I have my model available here, but if we want to look at a different number, I can have two different scenarios, but if you want to say what is it like, I can fairly quickly get that. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop talking and.
Yes, please.
I mean, I think it is a good point that there's a lot going on right now, a lot of community conversations. So if this committee feels like this is just one too many things happening right now, that's another reason we could push it off for later. But it is just that savings consideration from July to January, if you even want to consider it all.
You know that look. Really?
I think what I think what the struggle is recognizing that we do this and have the haulers be offsetting this cost so that we can continue to mitigate homeless trash and allow the grant funds to continue to support the other services that the funding can do. It provides an opportunity for us to accept that gift. And then when we have to start looking at rate changes, which are going to be costs of, just sort of the standard costs that COSA that will come up, we can evaluate at that point if then this service is not something that we increase. Like it won't become it doesn't have to become part of that conversation. We would only be discussing COSA and then have to find, as I understand it, funding for the SOS team and the trash from other sources at that.
Yeah, so right now, in the general fund forecast, we have the cost offset for fiscal year 26 with the grant funding. And then it's just part of the deficit funding. Deficit for the funding. So it's just a general fund obligation at that point. There's no other specific funding.
No funding for it, and we just have to continue to pay for it out of the general fund.
We'll make other choices, yes.
Or make other choices, which might mean cutting other things to be able to.
There goes our salaries.
I was expecting a raise. Does that help?
I'm trying to decide.
Okay. Okay.
No,
Nikki, do you have any other questions?
No, I mean, this makes sense to move forward with the code amendment. Because I could, in preparation for the 1st of July, whatever. And it's just really important that we're very, I want to say explicit with the reasoning that we're making the code change. And what transparent, yeah, that's a good word. Really important, but I also see the reasoning for it so that we continue while we're working this other stuff, well, basically July onward as well. I'm not too sure what sort of notes we're gonna have there. But it gives us some time, and the code language is important so that we can pay for the program. Right.
Brian, is there any flexibility in the timeline? Like if they met next month, could they decide to do it that way?
As far as being able to do a first and second reading council, yes, we would need to have that, I think by. I know we're wanting to have a little bit sooner, one, just because of some scheduling. Also to have it as part of the budget conversation as soon as possible. But I think, once it's what, a 30-day implementation
Forward.
for the ordinance. Unless there's an emergency clause put in.
I think what I struggle with in some of these committee meetings, or some of these committees, is we come to the table with these huge ideas that are thrown at us. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, I really don't. But these huge ideas that come to us that we're expected to make a decision on in a meeting that's an hour and a half. And there's so much complexity to it, it just, to me, sometimes I'm like, okay, wait, I need time to process, and so. Yeah.
And I guess that's why I'm trying to see if we have some flexibility, because even we did introduce it back in December.
In November.
But we have a new committee, it's a new year, a
I
lot
was
of,
on it last.
other stuff going on.
Yes.
But it is a big shift, right? And it means something to make a recommendation from this committee and for it to turn into our first reading at city council, right?
Right.
So I feel like if you need an extra month, we should. take
Yeah,
the
and so
extra
we could take it and we could talk about it again, March 20th. And then first reading would, at that point, would probably be second.
March 24th.
No, it would end up being, it would be after we start budget. It would be what, the 21st of April? 28th of April.
21st of April.
That's a work session, so it would be,
It could be the 14th.
could it be the 14th? 14th, and then the second reading would be the 28th. And then you could, we'd have one last budget meeting that would be able to kind of confirm it.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I'm not as concerned about that because we can clean it up when the budget gets to you in June. At
Okay.
the city council level.
Okay,
It's
that's
small enough,
helpful.
we can make that shift. So I don't want you to feel pressure because of that type of.
So,
Well, and I don't want to come into a committee meeting and make things difficult, but I also want to make sure that I'm understanding what it is that I'm going to be asking our constituents to do. Because it sounds to me like this is going to be a pretty substantial increase come January.
Can you go back to the other slide, right, where it shows the impact of the 3%? Okay, yeah, right there. And I think you're right? So whatever this is, there will be something on top of it
Right.
to address inflation.
in
I
January,
don't think we're expecting deflation at this point, right? So, I mean, for the residential customer, we're talking about 96 cents to $1.14 per month. And I don't want to minimize what that is, right? That's substantial for people right now. Right, but it is. This 3% will be on top of, I don't know if you have any idea what the other increase might be at this point.
I don't even want to speculate what.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
What changes associated with display.
If it say it's 5%, right, then you're looking at its own 80%. Addressable. Yes, which is still, $2.50 or something, but still
But
see an impact there.
but again, when we are discussing this in January, we can say, well, because of the other percentage increases that have to be made, maybe we don't do this. And we'll have to figure out funding the SOS team from other sources.
Well, and that's why if it works, I would prefer to not just make it. I think I have more questions. But I can't even think of right now, so.
Yeah, no worries.
So we can postpone this decision, this motion, and wait until March. And that may give you time, all of us time to consider what other questions. And then see if we want to move forward there, because we still would have enough time to have the budget completed by June, it sounds like, if we waited another month before this decision is made.
Yes, there is a tie to the budget, but I don't want that to.
Okay,
Constraining.
and that might be more my concern in the sense that I wanted to make sure that the full budget committee got to see this. And that I think in May, the first week of May might be that last opportunity, but you're right, I forgot about, we have to probably come back together to finalize everything in June.
Right, absolutely. And
So-
changes do happen in June.
And so we'll have a whole month more than I was anticipating in this case of having this information for the budget.
Well, and remember, it only takes two of you guys, so you don't need my vote if you want to.
No, but I also feel that you need to have all the, your questions and things that you're concerned about. I too recognize people are going to be unhappy. They're gonna be unhappy anyway.
Well, and what I'm thinking, my gut reaction is, so what we're saying is, we know there's gonna be a 3%, right? We know there's gonna be this 3% increase that happens. And we're stepping into it, and it almost seems a little shady to me. I hate to use the word shady, but
I'm sorry for that because
and I don't
we
mean.
can change it.
I don't mean that that's our intent. I'm afraid that's how it would feel to
Well,
customers.
so,
Is- You know what I
do
mean?
you
Like-
feel like you want to just have more time? Or do you feel you don't?
I think
want-
I have more questions, so yeah.
Okay, let's just plan to postpone this motion. And then, and I would suggest that, that either our committee, we want to, have Ryan review this information, or Ryan and Josh, with you each individually. And then, have a better understanding when we come in March. That way you feel prepared. If that works for you.
Yeah, I think that's what I said. That
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you're all both comfortable with that, and then my request would also, let's have, Counselor Brown also have that opportunity so that he will be right, he'll be at least up to date with for all of
I
us.
figured that he and I can, because I'm sure he'll have tons of questions and then,
Certainly.
yeah.
We all are very
That's
good at
what I was thinking.
questions, yes, and we're all at very, very good at questions, so.
Just
I
real
think-
quick before we leave, if I may.
Yeah.
There is a bit of a chicken and egg situation here, right? Because even when we get to October and we're talking about a COSA, in order to consider a higher franchise fee, it has to be, adopted by that point. So we're gonna have, even if you wanted to have those decisions together in implementing in January, there are still two separate processes with the code amendment and the rate increase. So there's always gonna be a little bit of a disconnect too between those two things. But
So there wouldn't be any case where they would happen together.
you could have them
At the
happen
same-
simultaneously, like the same meeting, but they're two
Right.
separate items. And we have to assume with the COSA that the franchise fee is increasing to make sure we have the right. So there's gonna be,
And we did this in 2015, I want to say, the franchise fee was increased from 5 to 7%.
Oh, good.
And so there was a public hearing for the first meeting and the first and second meeting, and I think a month later, we came back with the COSA and the actual request for the rate increases for that time. So there was two separate processes that were very close to each other.
I was waiting until we had this committee. Okay, I think,
Do we need a motion to postpone the decision on the so
I think we're just gonna push this out, so there's opportunities for conversations and more information. And then we'll come back in March, and then see if we want to, I'm assuming that we'll make the motion, it may or may not pass.
Sure, but I would appreciate having Councilor Brown's input.
Yes. I think that we're just, do it in March, okay?
Thank you for that, Grace. I appreciate it.
I think we all should, so that's a nice of you to say. So Brian, back to you, now that we know we're going to postpone that.
Information, I'll just move on.
Please do, please do.
I'm just gonna leave the slide there for a second, very briefly, upcoming events. I know that, Marion County has, some stuff with birthday coming up. I don't remember the days or the time. 26th, birthday itself is on the 22nd, so just be watching for, I'm sure there may be a number of different.
Is that February or March?
Sorry, so April 22nd.
Oh,
So it's out there, guys.
Just like, what month are we talking?
So April 22nd is Earth
Oh,
Day
there.
for 2025. I think you said on the 26th.
Yes.
Marion County, and so I'll have some more information for you, coming up here probably in March. So you can be looking forward to that. There may be some other events and stuff going on.
I bet there will.
Yeah,
The Tree City USA stuff.
so the next kind of big agenda item is really more informational and just to possibly open up to some discussion, although it doesn't require any council action. We wanted to kind of let you know what's going on with those next steps with the Recycling Modernization Act, kind of where we're at in that overall process. And so the next piece of this is what they call funding authorization. And so if you recall, through the responsible organizations, their membership, they collect funding, and that funding helps to improve all the different things that make the changes that are at the local government level that the RMA is supposed to make happen, right? So if we're gonna have reduce, well, the list is over here. Reduce contamination, we want to expand recycling options. There's a number of different things there, but I'm gonna go back one slide. So that, depending on who's providing those services, the city can direct where that funding is going to go. And so we can do one of a couple of things. We can either provide full authorization, which says there's a provider that's going to be doing X, and we're going to step out of the way, and we're just going to go ahead and just direct all that funding to this provider who's doing this activity related to RMA. There's partial authorization, which says, hey, the city is going to either participate in those activities, or we want to have a little more control over the direction of the funding for those activities. And so we may direct some money directly to the provider of those activities, and we retain some of that ourselves, or no authorization. This can be by categories that you gotta sneak preview there for a second, where we are retaining all the funding, and basically pros send us all the money and we will act as the grantee, if you will, of that funding to each of those activities or to each of those providers. One way or another, all of that funding must be distributed to the entity that is incurring the costs, those eligible costs. So the 5 basic categories, if you will, for this funding. Some of these we may or may not need to participate in. The first one is transportation. So that's the cost related to transporting recovered materials more than 15 minutes. Now, here in Salem, the current closest processor of recyclable material is Garden Services, right here in Salem. And so long as Garden becomes a permitted processor under the new RMA guidelines, that material is going less than 50 miles. This may be a non-issue. If for some reason either Garden doesn't get that certification, or some of the covered materials need to go somewhere else other than Garden, there may be some transportation costs involved. And so that's one of those funding areas that the growth will cover. Second category is contamination evaluation. So there's, as part of RMA, in order to reduce the contamination, we need to know whether or not there's contamination in the recycling. And so there's that periodic evaluation of the quality and contamination of that collected material. And there's going to be some costs associated with that. But again, we'll have that choice. So depending on who is doing that activity, do we just say, hey, just cut them the check, or are we going to direct that through the city and kind of fall through the city? Contamination reduction programming. This is an area where, based on the RMA rulemaking, it could be up to $3 per capita. So for the Salem area, that could be upwards of around $500,000. Again, that's an up to. So depending on who is doing the contamination reduction program, in other words, some of the outreach, education. Historically, Marion County has done a lot of that work. Rachel, what was that? Waste reduction coordinator. Waste reduction coordinator, thank you. So they've hired waste reduction coordinators, and they have done a lot of that work for the cities at the county level. So we may be partnering with them, directing some of that their way. We may be hiring our own waste reduction coordinator to help with that at the city level. So there's some discussions that need to be had and understanding of how that might look. The next is the actual expansion of the opportunities to recycle, and that's based on a needs assessment that the city and counties filled out here a little while ago. Within the city of Salem, the biggest need that we identified is our recycling depots. So we have a very robust curbside collection system for recycling, but the biggest need is within depots. So that'll be, we have those conversations with the haulers. Basically, we may say, you know what, I would know what's needed based on their specifications. We're going to step out of the way of, we're going to let the pro have that funding of haulers, or we might decide to interject ourselves in that process. The last one here is the purchase of post-consumer recycled content collection containers. Basically means any new containers, carts, that sort of thing, are required to have a 10% post-consumer. Basically, 10% of the material that's used to make those should come from recycled content. If the cost of those is those with that 10% post-consumer recycled content is more expensive than not, then the difference is paid for by the pro. This is an area I can very.
I forgot what the acronym means.
Oh, sorry.
I've been sitting here going, okay, what is it?
I apologize.
No, you're fine.
Producer responsible organization. So that the organization that has stepped up here in Oregon to do that is CAA. Now I can't remember what that acronym is. Circular Action Alliance. Yeah, thank you. Circular Action Alliance. And they won't officially be the pro until July 1st, essentially. But they are front runner. They are basically doing all the work, working toward being that pro. But that's still in that proposed pro. But they're front runner. They're the only one in the room. So if they don't make it, we're going to be a solo. So
I know that one.
Anyway, and I can see that the number 5, that last category, I can see that as a, I don't want to get in the way of having to collect their receipts and send it to the pro for the reimbursement. It's like, I can see that as a category very clearly. They just let the haulers handle that. They can submit receipts. And this funding can be either on a reimbursement basis or it can be front loading the cost, depending on the type of activity.
So do you choose one based on category or?
So the authorization, so the city will determine the authorization based on those categories.
And what are your thoughts on which, are you thinking partial? Are you thinking no authorization? What are your thoughts on that?
So I haven't talked about this with other staff, but my initial gut reaction, again, starting with that very last one, I see that as something that we don't interject ourselves in that, we give them full authorization. I can see probably the same thing for transportation. Whoever, or if transportation, but our costs required for that. That may either be on a mile, ton reimbursement or something like that. I don't see that the city needs to interject itself into that process of, oh, where's the money going to come? Because then they will be responsible, we're responsible for making sure that the activity occurs. But as far as the version of that, I can see,
Are you gonna be evaluating the completion?
I don't know. So, and that's some conversation. I haven't called you guys yet. We need to set
Yeah, we need
You know, so just as an example.
I was just curious what your thoughts were.
So the contamination evaluation and the contamination reduction programming, one of the things we're kind of waiting for is that the elements of that and what are eligible activities that will be determined by DEQ. That it has to meet a certain criteria that it does these things or better. So if we can come up with a better way of doing it, then their suggestions or their recommended protocol. So kind of waiting for what that recommended protocol is from them. But just as an example, whenever there's funding going to be available, the sales calls are coming. It's like, hey, we can do this for you, right? So one example of that is a company out of Canada that offers AI program cameras that would be in all the recycling trucks that can identify it, does some learning. It takes a couple of weeks for it to kind of go through the process, but it would, working with us, would identify which material going into the truck was a contaminant, and then they can. So it identifies material, then can send the customer a postcard and say, hey, you screwed up. Do better next time. They get 3 postcards anyway. So I could see that if that technology was used, that could be contamination evaluation and it could be contamination reduction program. So it could possibly be both of those.
That's a good idea, because I was thinking about that this morning.
So, and there may be other things, you know, going out to schools and waste reduction coordinators out in the classrooms and teaching kids, because you want to change something in the household, teach the kids, right? I teach the parents. It's like, no, you can't put it in there. Anyway, so there's a lot of different elements, a lot of different strategies on this. And so kind of waiting to see what the DEQ's suggestions or what their direction is. And then based on that, we can come up with what that plan would be for the city, partnering with other agencies, which partners, Gardner, Hollers, County, I mean, what's our plan? So the timeline for this is a little cart before the horse, I feel. We have to determine the authorization by March 31st
Of this year.
of this year. The good news is we can change it.
Authorizations by category,
Yes.
we have to determine,
by
but
March.
we don't know what the requirements by DEQ are.
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
that what I'm saying?
Exactly. Now, the good news is we can change it annually. We're gonna change it every, so if it doesn't quite work out, then we can adjust it. We might err on the side of holding it a little closer and saying, okay, give us all the money and then we'll direct it as needed. And as the comfort level and understanding increases, then we may provide more authority to those providers to get the funding. So this is,
I'm just looking at you in awe because it seems like we have trusted partners.
absolutely.
So. I mean, I would probably err more on the side of. We'll take it back when we need to, not we'll give it to you when we choose to, but that's just me.
For the vast majority of them, I think it's likely, full authorization. It's really only the contamination reduction program, especially that the city might want to have, our own waste reduction coordinator, the focus on city neighbors.
I think about budget though with that, so it's like,
I
okay.
mean, it comes with the offsetting.
But
Does it pay for everything? Does it pay for the COLAs? Does it pay for the curves that's involved. It's not just that salary that I'm thinking about, it's all of the benefits and all the other
Well, that's
stuff.
a challenge, we haven't seen
Right,
guidance yet on what's eligible, is like there are indirect costs that are associated with it, right?
I'm not trying to stop you from adding employees, I'm just.
Yeah, you're being mindful of the budget.
If you don't mind if I interject, so we, through our haulers association, we do, well, through our joint group, we do have a recycling coordinator that we use that goes out to schools and stuff. There has been talk of us taking on some of that too, so like you said, budget wise, if it ran through us, it would still be included in our rates, but it wouldn't be directly necessarily through City of Salem. So there's opportunities to partner in multiple ways, is all I can say. And I would like to hear Ryan read number 5 again. That was pretty entertaining. But yes, there are ways to partner.
One thing that has been made very clear is that any of the elements that RMA, Recycling Modernization Act, if it requires funding beyond what the pros will provide, we don't have to do it. So if we can't get funding from the pro to meet that requirement, the city doesn't have to add any additional funding to make it. So there's, in other words, it's not, there's no unfunded mandates for that.
And we wouldn't be penalized.
Correct.
So that alone is a nice thing to learn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just curious, may I ask a question, this last one that says that the containers, these are the containers that I'm putting my trash in have to be 10% recycled. Are they now any percentage of?
So there is one manufacturer that, so they use these molds, injection molds to create those, the carts that are out the curb. And there's one manufacturer where the core, there's like 3 layers essentially. And I believe their core layer is recycled
Material.
Yeah.
And so that, then that one
I
manufacturer
think that would
already,
apply. Yeah, and they're already selling those carts.
okay,
So I think that would apply, but
so other manufacturers are gonna have to change how they make them if they want to keep selling.
I guess so, but I think this is only for containers that are holding recyclable material, right? It's not going into like garbage containers, yard debris containers.
I think you're correct.
I think it's specific to just.
Just the recycling container itself.
Or I think, I don't know,
The yard
if
waste,
it goes into commercial, I don't know about that, having a plastic commercial container. Which they, yeah, I don't know, there's a lot to be discovered still.
yeah, we're all in it together.
Yes,
Since recycling and the yard waste, I mean,
You would think so.
still working toward reduction of waste.
that would be a good clarification, I don't know if yard
Yeah.
waste is included.
I would even see that even the gray card is also part of that, but it just says purchase of post-consumer recycling content. Collection containers.
Does that include the red bin too?
Don't know where it ends.
That's the end of this presentation, and actually there's nothing else on the agenda, so. This. Let me back up. These categories and some of the recommendations of the county staff over the next few weeks, we'll be working through what our recommendations would be. Again, this doesn't require council action, but I want to keep at least this committee apprised of the direction that we're going. So you are aware of these partnerships we're having. And if you see a funding item on the budget, and like, I've never seen this before, it's a waste coordinator, waste reduction coordinator, how is this being funded? And you kind of understand kind of where you'll have some background information.
I think we're all this. That we don't have to stop which rates paying for all of these things. So. That's certainly a question, but all I can see is a whole lot of work for people, whether they're current staff or potentially new staff. This is gonna be difficult to get out and get it done, so thank you everyone for all of that work.
I just make a quick comment. I'm thinking about communities that already offer incentives to increase recycling. And they may have some ideas to help with that. But I don't want to make extra work for staff or anybody to look into it. didn't know if there was like a recycling group that had the ideas out there.
It seems a lot of the information you're getting pretty well prepared, or is it more like nebulous and you don't quite know what it's all about?
Yes.
Yeah. I love
Well,
that.
well, both.
Okay,
There are a lot of specific. So there's rulemaking that's been going on with a lot of information that comes out of that. And it's very complex for a lot of years. And we've seen just these 5 categories here, there's a lot of other stuff back to get to this point. So there are kind of those rules of what needs to happen, but then we have these categories, but what are the specifics of that? A lot of that is still being developed. The good news is, while RMA has an effective date of July 1st of this year, we have a 6-month base period.
Okay.
DEQ that's come out and said, hey, we understand that not everything is going to be perfect on day 1. You need to be making efforts, you need to be making strides toward this. But the intent or the expectation is that we're pretty much dialed in by December 31st of this year.
and the goal is what?
The goal is to have all these elements in RMA. So
I didn't know if we had a reduction goal or,
there are some reduction goals adopted at a state level. But from our so the elements for local government are education, are we providing opportunities to recycle? Are we educating people on how to recycle? So ours are more specific activities that we need to complete, if you will, that should be hopefully leading to those statewide reduction goals.
Are they making kind of this maximum student applicable, not hard and fast?
Each of the so, yeah.
okay, well, the reason I'm asking, I know we're toward the end here, is my aunt lives in West Lynn. And we were talking about her services there, and like she has the regular solid waste, whatever, pickup once a month. She has a 35-gallon container and it's once a month, but the recycling and everything is every week. So when I talk to her on Sunday evenings or whatever, she's like, oh, I took all, took my recycling and my yard waste out. I mean, it's something she does every Sunday. And then she only has her other main household waste container once a month, but it's a 35-gallon. And I looked up the rates this morning and I went, my goodness, it costs her about half as much to have it that way. And so that to me is an incentive to recycle, but I could also see how it could increase contamination rates. So it all kind of ties in, but I just thinking about what other communities are doing to incentivize more recycling.
Well, so currently, we're doing that people can select the 20-gallon, and they can do that every other a week, so
Right,
they,
right.
so we have those incentives.
Right, I'm not sure that's quite enough. The other thing they do is they offer 1 free pickup a year. Additional pickup.
Like bulky stuff.
Yeah, well, I don't know, it just said additional pickup, so I don't know if that means maybe your cart gets picked up 2 weeks in a row or something at Christmas time or something.
So
But
it's,
I'm trying to think of incentives to go along with the rate increases too, to help offset costs.
And that's something that, so as we're getting through what's required for RMA and making sure we're meeting those requirements, I was hoping to actually in January talk about a work plan for this year. One of the things I'd like to for this committee to consider are some of those things, or should we or can we be looking at our waste services that we provide weekly, bi-weekly, that type of thing. Should we be looking at that differently? Should we be adding bulky waste collection like some other communities do? A number of years ago, this seems counterintuitive, but and 95-gallon cart for trash was suggested. Considering that many people in our community sign up for 265-gallon carts. So they need, maybe to have a larger family, such as generations, type of single household. And so in order to actually save the money, you can offer a 95-gallon cart. So they can get all of that in the weekly cart rather than having to pay for additional smaller carts. Some other options, does it make sense for our community to go to every other week collection on all garbage? We increase the weekly collection of recycling. So just some of those questions, I think would be big for this committee to discuss and.
Sure, it makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
glad they're here.
So that definitely those questions are on the way.
Since you brought it up, there are some unknowns with the RMA because they've kind of added some things to the recycling list. So that is one thing that we're going to be watching to see how much increased volume that creates. Because there's a potential where, yeah, maybe it doesn't make sense for every other week. We might have to go every week to pick up all the material that's now getting put into the cart.
Right,
So there's a
right,
lot of
makes
unknowns
sense.
that we're not going to know until it comes. So, yeah, just thought I'd-
Okay, no, that makes a lot of
And
sense.
and I would state that as soon as we change the things that we can put in there, it will then add to the fact that people will be putting in more wrong things.
eventually.
Because it's easy to do. People would put in wrong things now, because we took away so many things that we once could. And so making changes, oftentimes, it takes a while before one realizes what they can put in their recycling and what they can't. And the haulers are the ones that take the hit.
This would be a good future discussion. Moving parts.
Thank you for the question.
But it sounds like what you're basically asking is understanding what other communities are doing and to use that as a potential opportunity. Us to consider.
Sure, I'd like to know how they pencil it out, so I guess I'll just. Maybe we'll go down to the office and talk about it. I don't know.
Any last comments or anything for the group?
I came up from California. I'm a super recycler.
Thank you.
One of the problems with warm climates is the garbage gets really ripe.
Right.
So the 2-week deal is problematic in the warmer times of the year. But, what we're talking here is about changing people's behavior
Right.
and habits. If we don't do something, our landfills, we can't expand indefinitely. We can't take it to the desert indefinitely. We gotta recycle more. And so getting less taken to outside of Salem is the only way to go in the long term. Is that we can't just keep hauling it to somebody else's backyard. Because there's an end. I don't know where it is, but people have to recycle more.
Yes. And manufacturers have to kind of change their, and that's what this whole remodernization is about, is having producers and shippers change what is done so that there's less waste that is not even needed. Thank you very much for coming and providing your statement. Anybody else? If not, then I shall adjourn this meeting. Thank you again for coming.